right, well, again, we're getting ready to get into a riveting conversation of tax increment financing. So if you don't have any questions now, I'm sure you hang around on highly technical financial questions. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. I am here to do my annual presentation on tax increment financing, the basics of basically two incentive tools that we have in our toolbox. We don't have any submittals by anyone. I wish I was in front of you to tell you that I had some sort of great project that had been submitted. I don't, but that makes it easier for us to have this conversation, so it's just a refresher. Or maybe the first time for some folks on two particular tools we have in the toolbox for incentives for when developers come in. Say if a developer came and wanted to develop Kmart, and what type of incentives would they be asking? How do those incentives work? So first thing I wanted to establish is just a few of the key terms. I did distribute basically a glossary to all of you. I have extras for anybody in the public if they'd like them. Essentially, just the key terms that you're going to have when we talk about TIF is increment, which is going to be the difference between your property value before and after the TIF project. You've got a TIF district versus a TIF project. The district is the larger TIF area, and then the project is going to fall within. You can have multiple TIF projects within a TIF district. So we have an I-35 TIF district, but we have TIF projects within. TIF project, I'd just explain that. TIF application is the application that the developer would come write a check. They would submit an application spelling out what it was they wanted from the city in terms of a public-private partnership. TIF eligible expenses are statutory expenses that can be reimbursed with the use of tax increment financing. Funding agreement is essentially how the money gets distributed between the partners in a TIF agreement. Feasibility study is exactly what it sounds like. Will this work? Will this bear fruit? Will it bear fruit to a certain degree of certainty that the developer says that it will, so we can make sure that any partnership that the city was to enter into had a reasonable return on investment expectation of. TIF redevelopment project plan is the document. TIF redevelopment agreement is the agreement between all of the parties. How TIF works. TIF essentially diverts all or a portion of new incremental local taxes created by a project. Once again, it's incremental, and it's all or a portion of it. It doesn't have to be all of them. We historically have offered up 100%, but you don't have to offer up 100% of the incremental taxes. It's for real property taxes. That's going to be, it diverts 100% of the new property taxes, except for the 20 mills that's statutorily required to go to the state for education, and the 1.5 mil that goes to the state's general fund. There's also other available local taxes. Well, we usually hear about property tax TIF. There are city sales tax TIF, transient guest tax, which is our bed tax on our hotels, utility franchise fee taxes that you can TIF. And all local taxing districts are affected, meaning that anyone that has a mill, except for those exempted categories being the 20 for school, 1.5 for the state, is up for the partnership. That means that your school districts, your state, your library, your county, all of those, I'm sorry, not the state, your library, your county, your community college, those are all up for partnering in the redevelopment or development project. It's up to 20 years per project area. That's the maximum duration. It doesn't have to be. Those of you that were here will recall that we only allowed about 6 years on track B over on frontage next to Infinity. We figured that once we put the calculus through that, we said 6 years would be enough to do that, and also serves an incentive that they don't sit on their hands and actually let's make this thing happen. The increment, how is it calculated? So if you've got a parcel before redevelopment, property assessed value is $100,000. So this is just an example. The taxes would be $12,000. After redevelopment, after the improvements are made, you'd have a property assessed valuation of $1 million, and taxes would be $120,000. So what you have is you've got $120,000 of improved value taxes. We've got the base, which is off limits, which is the $12,000 that was originally going to city, county, school, library, all the different taxing entities. That's frozen. That continues to go to those places. Then you've got your 20 mils and your 1.5 mils that go to the school finance formula and the state, meaning that you've got, in this scenario, $86,500 that's left for that partnership to go with the developer for TIF reimbursable expenses. So, you know, I have fondness for things flying around in PowerPoint, so this is a great time for me. So we've got a base of $12,000 before we had a TIF established. This is the money that goes to all of the taxing entities. After that redevelopment, that number stays the same. However, we don't just have $12,000 available anymore. We have $120,000. That money is distributed as follows. You've got your 20 mil, and these are not to scale, but you've got your 20 mils for school finance. You've got your 1.5 for state finance. And then you've got 86,500 that's up for the partnership, whether that's 100% of or some other percentage of. The $12,000 remains constant. That goes to the people that have received it all this time, or at least had received it on the last day before the TIF was established. That remains. And the money that comes from the incremental improvements is the money that we're talking about that's available for TIF. So effect on other taxing districts, no impact on to current taxing jurisdictions, no diversion of current taxes. Essentially what that means is what I just said. If nothing were to happen, this money would not have been available in the first place. So the money that the taxing jurisdictions are receiving the day before the establishment, they continue to receive. It's only new revenue that's used, and it does not take away from our schools, and that the 20 mils on increased assessed valuation is still there. This is a sample approval process for TIF, specifically made small so you can't read it, and as difficult as possible. But basically what you've got here, the whole point of all of this is to show you that despite we've got 4 different tracks for this particular TIF example, we try to bring them all forward to council for final approval on one night, so everything is laid before you. So whether that's the financing of it, whether that's the zoning, whether that's the redevelopment agreement, all of those things, while they may come to council at incremental times throughout that process, we try to bring it to council all on one night for final approvals. So that would be how we would propose, should there be any submittal in the near future, we would bring it forward. Any questions about TIF? Yes, sir.
In terms of calculating the increment, you start with a base value.
Correct.
And so the idea that you're just using new money is really dependent on when you calculate the base from. My understanding is that in the current I-35 redevelopment district, the base is calculated from 1994. So 96.
95?
I think it's 95. We're close. It's
Anyway,
it's a long time.
And so essentially that makes the assumption, if there's really no new money involved, that the value right before the project, let's say for example a Kmart project were to be added to that TIF district,
Sure.
The incremental value would be calculated based on the 1996 or 4 or 5, whatever value, versus the value after the project's completed. Some of that value potentially might not be actually new money and actually be, is that correct?
That is correct. If we were to add something to the existing TIF, it would take on the 1995, 4, 6, I think it's 5, the 1995 value. So yes, it would not reflect, because it's already in the TIF, the value of it today. Does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, and the other question that I have is that my understanding also is that when you take and put property into a TIF district, or could you explain this to me, that the other, all the property taxes generated from that must be spent within that district, is that correct?
That is correct. So any property that is within the I-35 TIF, all of those properties that generate property tax, the revenue that's produced has to be spent within the boundaries of the I-35 TIF. So, yeah, did that answer your question?
Yes.
That is correct.
So essentially, if you put a larger chunk of property tax value into a TIF district, that could possibly be an offsetting sort of risk in the sense that some of that value is no longer available to fund the things that would come out of the general property tax, that bucket, if you will.
Meaning for things outside of the TIF?
Correct, yes.
That would be correct. Anything that you added into the I-35 TIF that had been on the general tax rolls that now goes into the TIF, that money would be restricted for use. However, that property still, whatever property tax it was paying when it went in, still remains once it comes on the TIF, because that would become the base. Is that correct?
Or does it?
Yeah.
So does the property tax paid on the base that's now in the TIF district, can that be spent outside of the TIF district?
The base actually still goes to the general fund, and still goes to the school district, and still goes, so does that answer your question? Yeah, whatever it was if it's integrated into the TIF, that base amount is still available for police cars and pencils. The incremental property taxes that would be paid can only be used on things within the TIF. That is correct.
Excuse me, I got a question. Who does the feasibility study?
That just all depends. I mean, we've had, this guy sitting back here. I think the last time we had Columbia Capital do it, Jeff White did it for, on the ditch, didn't you, correct? Track B, we call it the ditch. Hopefully it won't be a ditch long. We have part of the funding agreement that was in those definitions is for the applicant. I think the last time the applicant submitted a check for $60,000, and then we pay third parties to come in and do all of those studies that we need to do to determine if this makes sense. Is it feasible? Is there a good return on investment if we were to partner with the taxpayers' money? But that is on their shoulders to pay. We don't, the taxpayers don't pay that.
Third party.
But that's reimbursed after the fact, or it becomes reimbursable to 60,000?
Yes, I believe that is,
No, it's just
The fee-
reimbursed on the funding agreement.
right, correct.
It didn't have anything to do with the TIF itself.
Okay. Second question, and last one.
Yeah,
If this legislators work on a refinancing of school funding program, is it possible they could change it from 20 mil to something else?
I suppose that they could do whatever they want. How it would affect existing agreements, I don't know the answer to that because the agreements are already in place. I suppose that if they changed it from 20 to 40, we might have to come up with 20 extra mils, which you'd probably have every developer that has anything done in the TIF speak and say, hey, that's not going to work for us.
Right, yeah.
So that would be my guess, but I don't know. That's
your prediction.
speculation.
Do you know how long it's been 20 mil? I've been on the council 6 years.
Since the mid-90s, Columbia Capital is.
So probably not possible. Well, it's possible, but not probable they'll change it.
Anything's possible if you come up with that much money.
Okay, thank you.
And then just further clarification, if we added and expanded the TIF area, it's a new TIF project, and when we spend the funds that we collect, that has to be spent, is it within the full district, not within just that new project?
That would depend on the agreement. One of the benefits that we have discussed, should the Kmart redevelop, would be that by bringing the Kmart into the I-35 TIF, there is funding that's already available in the I-35 TIF, as opposed to if we had a Kmart TIF by itself, that those funds would be available to, on the front end.
But
We would be able to work out some.
Write the TIF that way.
I'm sorry?
The TIF agreement would be written so that it would say that those funds could be used.
All of the funding is spelled out in the agreement, in the redevelopment.
Do the other people that are in that district currently, do they have to agree to that, or is this something separate?
I don't believe that they have to agree to it at all.
They're notified of it.
Yeah, they're notified.
Because this would be the pool that they had access to is now going to be potentially used by somebody new.
It would be if they had a redevelopment project, yes, sir.
Could a school district potentially be harmed by a TIF proposal we come up with at any point? And why?
Well, I don't want to speak for the school district, but I will tell you one of the concerns the school district has always had if you TIF residential. If you bring in people that they have to provide services for and there's not corresponding tax dollars to increase their ability to provide those services. Residential is the one that I have always, in conversations I've had with the school district, that they have concerns about. It's just bringing in families that require service. If you're bringing in additional retail, they've kind of taken a hands-off approach despite some disagreements and posturing perhaps that was occurring a couple of years ago. It's really come down to their capital, which is their 8 mills that they pull their capital outlay, and if you're tipping residential, that's really where they have concerns, because you're bringing in potential folks that need those resources that aren't there.
Time-wise, 20 years was max. You bring Kmart into I-35, that 20 years extends 20 years or whenever that 20.
It would extend the entire TIF by 20 years. So right now, the TIF is set to expire in 2032, because the last TIF that we added to that extended the clock was IKEA. So that we gave them 20 years, and that extended that clock from 12 to 32. That is something that we would obviously, if we're talking about Kmart or something else, we would start to weigh. Part of why we would get folks involved in this would be to figure out, if we go to the base value of 95, how much does that money make available? Does it benefit us if there's some of that cash on hand that helps incentivize this product? Or does it make more sense to just establish a new one and let the existing I-35 die a natural death? And perhaps maybe even pay that off earlier. There's a couple different moving parts in there when we talk about new development with the existing I-35 tip that make it lots of questions you have to ask before you can get to a good answer for what comes next. Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Yeah. Kind of a follow-up to that. So if the TIF district is extended, then logically the constraints on the use of the entire property, or all of the incentives that have been paid stay restricted for longer.
You are correct. Yes, sir. Like I said,
It's one of the oldest existing TIFs in Kansas.
It is, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, Merriam Town Center was one of the first to be untangled from TIF. If you recall, we kind of touted that as a successful project, and it was, but we were one of the first people to ever establish one and then actually retire.
Playing devil's advocate, you just said it was a successful town center. Speak as a resident and not as a city administrator, and give me a couple of reasons why we shouldn't be doing TIFs at all in this city.
Why we shouldn't be doing TIF?
Yes. Any criticism that you remember people commenting on?
I mean, the common ones are it's corporate welfare. You're giving money away to people that don't need it. I mean, those are going to be the common. Those are going to be the common concerns that people have. I think that some of those are a misunderstanding of exactly the benefits, and you have certain municipalities throughout the nation that perhaps are a little liberal in their use of it. I think we are very measured in our use. I think we look at those things and we say, as an example, the track B, we said, hey, you can do 6 years, we're not going to extend the clock. If it doesn't work, we will get what we want, which is a pad-ready site before dime one is paid back to the developer. So if we at least get a pad-ready site and it falls apart, common sense dictates that the owner will sell it to someone else, and ultimately the taxpayers get a revenue-producing business on that site. But the taxpayers are not going to be on the hook to spend a dime until it's no longer a drainage ditch. So I think that we have a pretty judicious use of TIF. I think we're very thoughtful about it and recognize that people quite often want to be in Merriam because of some of the assets we have here, and they're gonna ask for money. One example is we've got a car dealership that's getting ready to break ground here that they asked for incentives, and we told them they didn't get incentives, and they still wanted to be here, and that was because we recognized the value of being here. We can't. It's out there. They're going to ask for it. It's up to us to kind of look through that and say, hey, look, we don't think that this warrants that. So I think we
Did,
do.
one doesn't, so.
Yeah, if you're turning a ditch into a dealership, I think that's a perfect example of why you might partner with someone.
All right, thank you.
Next is, real quickly, is community improvement districts. There's two types of funding that come from CIDs. Those are bonds and pay-as-you-go. Pay-as-you-go obviously is going to be preferred in almost everything that we do, including TIF. The difference is going to be CID bonds, or the city is going to transfer bond proceeds to the developer for the improvements that would be made at a site. And then the additional up to 2% that would be tacked on to your regular sales tax would be used to pay off those bonds. The big red circle with the cross in it is to make sure that everyone understands that would not be staff's recommendation if we were even asked for such a proposal. We like PAGA. We like to know that it's done, and the money that we're giving is money that's available today. So that's going to be pay-as-you-go. There's a lot of information on here. Essentially, what it tells you is that only money that's available will go towards the developer, and it's basically the routing of the money as it goes from the point of sale to the state back to an account that we would oversee, and then if there are eligible expenses per the redevelopment needs, but it's not uncommon to have a TIF and a CID for some of these larger projects that you'll see in some of our neighboring cities. Yes, sir.
You may have just answered this, but, so right now, all of our economic development projects just use TIF, the property tax, and possibly some with a little bit of sales tax on the IKEA project.
Correct.
We do not have any CID, or have we ever used CID?
We have no CIDs. I don't even know that we've ever been approached with this.
There's been, some debate on us expecting CIDs of the projects in the past. After conversations with the developers, they just came out. And there was a time when, again, this was before I was mayor, CIDs were not something the council was at all interested in. But the use of CIDs has changed considerably. There has been some value in taking areas. There isn't a city around us that hasn't been using them for really specific types of projects. They tend to start making sense for the so it's something.
And years ago, we had, if I remember correctly, there was a brief discussion on using a TDD, which we said,
These are going to be your two. There are other economic development incentives that are in the toolbox. These are the most common. These are the ones that likely will be requested of council when Kmart or any other major redevelopment comes into town. It's quite possible that, well, they have made no suggestion, but it's quite possible that Merriam Town Center, that they've been there for 20 years, they may decide in the next couple of years that they want to do a facelift similar to the centers in Prairie Village, Corinth, and the Village Shops, which that was an issue in that community. But I think if you went and looked and saw what's there now, you will see that there was a definite upgrade, a facelift in that community, and it was funded by a CID. So there are, once again, it's a trade-off. You're partnering, and what do you think that the public has an appetite to partner with in terms of what they're going to get for the investment?
Were the residents of Shawnee very upset about the CID that was on Cougar and Shawnee Mission Parkway or center there? No?
Maybe some,
I
yeah.
think we're pretty upset about it.
I couldn't speak to that, but I mean, there usually when you're talking about incentives, there's always someone that's upset about it. Absolutely. I mean, it's.
The thing to remember about it, and I'm not a proponent or opponent of it, it's much like your choices. What are your choices to go eat dinner? There are a lot of places around here that are pretty stylish places to eat. You probably don't know you're already paying a premium on top of your sales tax to get your bill. Now, with the sales tax, you wouldn't know if you're paying 11 and 12% sales tax for your food. They're everywhere. Most of the places that you would go out on a date for in this county will fall under those criteria because that's what it's taken the city to do to get these businesses to come there or whatever. But you have a choice. It's just like coming here and spending your sales tax money that might be going to a new pool. You don't have to come to Merriam to buy stuff, you can go to another city and pay less. So it's not something that we hold people hostage. You know, if you choose not to eat at a restaurant that's, that is a CID, because of that, that's your choice. You're not forcing anybody to do anything. And then if you do go to it, the money goes to help reimburse that small area for their costs to either bring the restaurant there or update the existing shopping center so the one would move there or upgrades with the money. So it's one of those things where, you know, there are people that don't like them because they realize that, wow, you know, my food bill's going up. Most people, myself included, I don't pay much attention to the sales tax. I just don't. Maybe I should. I'm not sure if I saw that it was 2% higher, I wouldn't come there. In most cases, I go there because I like the food and the environment. That 2% is not going to make a difference to me. But that's just me. So, you know, there's other people that makes a lot of difference too. And, you know, that's the nice thing about that is they can choose to go somewhere else where they don't have.
I think another example, just in closing, of what you will see from sometimes is you won't want, council will not want to give a full 100% property tax TIF. They want some to still go to the schools. They still want to share with some of that money with the partners that rightfully have a mill levy on those properties. So they will, instead of 100%, they'll do 50%, 75% with a quarter cent CID. So that the money is still the same. It's just how did we arrive at the money in a way that, you know, we keep our partners. I mean, it's, once again, it's a lot of dials inside the box that we can turn to get the same kind of output. It just depends on what the appetite of the council is and what the presentation is of the partnership. So.
Yeah, one question. Does that CID have an expiration time frame, 1 to 20 years? Is it like a TIF?
It doesn't. That's a great question. It does. I don't know what the duration is. Is it like 22 years? 22 years is the maximum. It does not require to be 22 years. It could be 10 years, 5 years. Once again, that's the benefit of having smart folks that can sit down and say, hey, if we want to partner with these folks at the level of $2 million, what's the easiest, best way to do that? And I mean, we would find some different scenarios that would get us where we needed to go if that was something that the council desired. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. I'll be down after that one. Yeah.
Oh, time for comment. Okay, good.
Okay, first of all, TIFs are a difficult thing. I don't understand that well. But the scouts wanted a disagreement, so here comes a disagreement. You ready?
Thanks.
Okay, the city of Merriam disagrees with the Merriam Drainage Board. And the disagreement, from what I heard tonight, when you have a TIF, nobody else loses money in the other districts. Yet, here's my tax statement on my house. Property tax on my house is $1,700. And if I look down the changes, there's a whopping one on there, and everybody else who's in the Merriam Drainage District, you've got it on yours too. It says that the Merriam Drainage District tax increased almost 42%. And if you go to the Merriam Drainage District and you say, why did you do that? Do you need that much more money? And they'll say no. The reason is because we lost 35% of the money that we had coming in that was TIF money. And because of that, we had to raise the tax on everybody. Now, the city of Merriam says, no, that's not right. So, and I don't understand it, but I do think we ought to think about this, that if we're giving TIFs to get business in here, and the taxpayers are paying because of the TIF, then something's wrong. Now, I will say that 42%, it amounts to $20 a year out of my $1,700, so it's not a big deal. But still, I don't know what these TIFs are going to do to the school district and to the others, and I don't understand it well enough, but I hope somebody here does. One more thing, off subject, I forgot to thank Kevin Brummer. I had a problem with a street near me. It was accident prone, and the town center forgot to put in the street markings,
he had it taken care of within a week, and I thank him. That's all I got to say.